She was left at the altar, and amidst the whispers and pitying glances, her millionaire boss approached slowly, leaned down beside her and whispered, "Pretend I'm the groom." And in that moment, everything changed. "He's not coming." The voice came from the front pews, a whisper too loud to be discreet. Beatrice Adams pretended not to hear, her eyes still fixed on the main door of the chapel. Ryan was going to arrive. Of course he would. He was just late. Traffic, some unforeseen circumstance, anything but what that voice suggested. "It's been half an hour," another person commented. And this time, Beatrice managed to identify the owner of the voice, a distant cousin of Ryan, who had never hidden her disdain for her. Poor thing, all dressed up, and the groom didn't even show up. Stifled giggles echoed through the pews. Beatrice tightened her bouquet of white lilies, her fingers trembling so much that some petals fell to the marble floor. The officiant beside her cleared his throat for the 10th time, his gaze pitying, more humiliating than any mockery. "Has anyone called him?" asked an aunt of Ryan, her voice laden with that false concern that barely concealed morbid satisfaction. "Has anyone called? He's not answering." More whispers, more contained laughter. Beatrice felt her face burn, the bodice of her dress suddenly suffocating. "My dear," the officiant began softly, "perhaps it's for the best." But Beatrice shook her head, still looking at the door. Ryan was going to arrive. He had to arrive. They had planned this wedding for an entire year. The chapel was full, the flowers perfect. The dress had cost 3 months' salary. He couldn't just not show up. "I always thought he wouldn't marry," someone behind her commented, not even bothering to lower their voice. "Ryan has always been a bit irresponsible, right?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the pews like waves. Her phone vibrated inside the small handbag that her maid of honor held a few meters back. Beatrice turned too quickly, stumbling in her dress, and the maid of honor rushed to support her. "Is it him?" Beatrice whispered, her voice coming out hoarse. Julia, her best friend since college, looked at the phone screen and her face paled. She showed the message to Beatrice, and the world seemed to tilt off its axis. It was from Ryan, just 3 words. "Sorry, I can't do this." No explanation, no justification, just that. Beatrice reread the message 3 times, as if the words could change meaning. They didn't. Ryan wasn't stuck in traffic. There was no unforeseen circumstance. He had simply chosen not to come. "Hey!" someone shouted from the back of the chapel. "Is there going to be a wedding or not?" Laughter erupted, no longer contained, no longer disguised. Beatrice felt her legs wobble. Julia held her by the arm, whispering something she couldn't process. She was looking at the faces in the pews. Some showed genuine pity, most showed curiosity, entertainment. They were enjoying her misfortune. This was a story they would tell for years. The bride left at the altar. Poor Beatrice, who waited half an hour for a groom who never showed up. They were taking discreet photos, sending messages to friends who weren't there. She was a spectacle. More phones began to ring. People answered without even leaving the chapel, speaking loudly about the scandal. "You won't believe what's happening here. The bride was left at the altar. Yes, I swear, I'm sending you a photo now." Beatrice saw discreet flashes. Someone was recording. This was going to end up on social media. It was then that she saw him in the last pew on the right, almost hidden by a column. Richard Taylor, her boss, the owner of the architecture firm where she had worked as a project coordinator for 3 years. He was there, impeccably dressed in a grey suit, his expression completely neutral, as if he were in yet another boring meeting. Beatrice knew he didn't want to be at this wedding. Richard had made it clear when she handed him the invitation. "Is it really necessary?" he had asked with his characteristic coldness. "I prefer not to mix personal life with professional." But she had insisted more for protocol than for a real desire to have him there. And now he was witnessing her complete humiliation. On Monday, when she returned to the office, everyone would know. Richard would probably look at her with the same indifference as always, or perhaps simply ignore her as if nothing had happened. "Beatrice, we need to decide what to do," Julia whispered urgently. "People are waiting. Do you want me to announce that the wedding is cancelled?" Beatrice looked at her friend, then at the officiant, then at the guests who were staring at her with that morbid expectation. How to get down from that altar, walk down the aisle with everyone watching, whispering, laughing. How to face her mother, sitting in the front row with red eyes from crying so much. "Look at her mother's face, poor thing," someone commented loudly. "Spent a fortune on this wedding. I bet Ryan was cheating," another voice speculated. "No one just disappears like that. She should have suspected." The rumors multiplied, each one worse than the last. Beatrice closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She wasn't going to cry, not there, not in front of all those people. "I want to go home," Beatrice finally said, her voice coming out stronger than she felt. "I just want to get out of here." Julia nodded, already mentally organizing the logistics, but before they could move, a male voice cut through the air. "Excuse me!" Everyone turned. Richard Taylor was standing, walking down the side aisle toward the altar. Each step was measured, deliberate, like everything he did. The whispers ceased instantly. Everyone knew Richard. Even those who had never seen him in person knew the reputation. Successful businessman, owner of one of the largest architecture firms in New York, frequently photographed at high-profile events. What was he doing? Beatrice watched him ascend the steps, confused. Richard stopped in front of her, so close that she could smell his expensive cologne, see the perfect cut of his Italian suit. For a second, there were only the two of them, the guests, the chapel. The humiliation, everything vanished. Richard stared at her with those dark, inscrutable eyes that always made her uncomfortable in the office. Then he leaned slightly, his lips almost touching her ear, and whispered, "Pretend I'm the groom." Beatrice blinked, certain she had misheard, but Richard continued in a low, urgent voice. "Trust me, I'll explain later. But right now, you're going to pretend the wedding is going as planned. With me." Before Beatrice could process, before she could ask if he was crazy, Richard turned to the officiant. "I apologize for the delay. There was an unforeseen circumstance." His voice filled the chapel authoritatively, leaving no room for questions. The officiant blinked in confusion. The guests murmured in surprise. Julia's eyes widened. "Richard, what are you doing?" Beatrice managed to whisper, her voice trembling. He turned to her, and for the first time since she had known him, Beatrice saw something different on his face. It wasn't coldness, it wasn't disinterest, it was determination, and perhaps, just perhaps, something resembling anger. Not at her, but at Ryan's situation, at all those who laughed. Richard lightly touched her arm, the gesture surprisingly gentle. "You're going to walk out of here with your head held high," he said softly, for her ears only. Not as the woman who was humiliated, but as the woman who got married. Even if it was all a farce, they didn't need to know. Beatrice stared at him, her brain struggling to keep up. It was madness, completely insane. But looking at the guests, seeing the phone cameras still pointed at them, hearing the whispers start again, she understood. Richard was offering an escape. "Why would you do this?" she asked, needing to understand. Richard held her gaze, and for the first time Beatrice saw a crack in his armor. Something vulnerable, something real, because no one deserves to go through this, and because I can, just like that, without elaborate explanations, without romantic promises, just a pragmatic choice. Beatrice looked at the officiant, then at the guests, then back at Richard. She could say no, she could run out of there, leave the wedding dress behind, and never look back. Or she could do what he suggested, pretend, act, give those guests a different story to tell, and maybe, just maybe, save a piece of her dignity. "All right," she finally whispered. "Let's do this." Richard nodded with what looked like relief, a quick flash across his face. He turned to the officiant, who was still standing there, completely lost. "Can we start?" Richard asked, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. The officiant looked at Beatrice, then at Richard, then at the guests, who were now whispering even louder. "I don't understand," the officiant admitted. "The groom isn't someone else." Richard didn't hesitate. There was a last-minute change, complex family matters. Ryan couldn't attend and asked me to take his place. Beatrice nodded. "We have all the necessary documentation." It was a lie. It was obviously a lie, but Richard spoke with such conviction that even Beatrice almost believed it. The officiant frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "This is highly irregular. I can't just—" But Richard interrupted him. "Officiant, with all due respect, the bride has already been humiliated enough. We can sort out the bureaucratic issues later. For now, I would just like to proceed." There was a moment of tense silence. The officiant looked at Beatrice, seeking confirmation. She felt herself nodding slowly, still processing what was happening. Finally, the officiant sighed. "All right, but this will need to be regularized later." Richard nodded in agreement. Then he positioned himself next to Beatrice, standing where Ryan should have been. The guests erupted in murmurs. "Who is this man? Is he her boss? Are they together? But what about Ryan?" Theories began to circulate instantly. Beatrice could imagine the rumors that would arise, that she was having an affair with Richard, that Ryan had found out and fled, that this had been planned from the start, each version more absurd than the last. But strangely, it was better than the truth, better than being the abandoned woman, the rejected one, the one who wasn't enough. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice hesitant at first, but gradually gaining strength. Beatrice could barely hear the words. She was hyper-focused on Richard beside her, on how he maintained perfect posture, his serene expression, as if he were exactly where he was meant to be. How could he seem so calm? How could he maintain that facade while everything around them was chaos? Beatrice had known him for 3 years and had never seen him lose his composure, not when important projects failed, not when clients yelled, not when the company faced a financial crisis last year. Richard always remained impassive, and now, pretending to marry his employee to save her from public humiliation, he was exactly the same, cold, controlled, impenetrable. "Richard Adams, do you take Beatrice Adams to be your wife?" the officiant asked. The traditional question, and Beatrice felt the air catch in her lungs. This was too real, too frightening. Richard turned to her, holding her hand. His fingers were firm, warm. "I do," he said, and his voice didn't tremble for a second. The guests whispered louder. Phone cameras captured the moment. Beatrice knew this would be everywhere by the end of the day. Then the officiant turned to her. "Beatrice Adams, do you take Richard Adams to be your husband?" It was her turn, her last chance to back out, to say this was madness, to confess it was all a lie. But looking into Richard's eyes, seeing the certainty there, Beatrice took a deep breath. "I do," she said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. The officiant quickly concluded the ceremony, clearly wanting to wrap up this bizarre situation. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Beatrice froze. They hadn't thought about that. Of course, they hadn't thought about that. Richard also seemed to hesitate for a fraction of a second, but then he leaned in, one hand lightly touching her face. "I'm sorry." He whispered so low that only she could hear. Beatrice saw him and then kissed him. It was brief, chaste, nothing more than a brush of lips. Yet even so, she felt something shoot through her like an electric shock. The guests applauded, some enthusiastically, others still confused. When Richard pulled away, Beatrice saw something in his eyes that she couldn't identify. Surprise, confusion, or something more. But before she could analyze it, he was already turning to the guests, offering his arm to her. "Let's go," he said softly. Beatrice took his arm, and together they descended the steps of the altar. The wedding march began, to play, late and out of sync. They walked down the aisle, and Beatrice kept her head held high, her eyes fixed ahead. She didn't look at the faces, didn't register the expressions. She just walked, one step at a time, holding Richard's arm, as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had just turned upside down. When they finally crossed the chapel doors and stepped into the sunlight, Beatrice felt her legs wobble. Richard immediately held her firmly. "Calm down. Breathe." She obeyed, pulling air into her lungs, gasping, desperate. What had she just done? What had they just done? Richard started to speak but didn't know how to finish. Richard guided her to the side, away from the door, where the guests would begin to exit at any moment. "We need to talk," he said, and for the first time his voice sounded tired. "But not here, not now." Beatrice nodded, still trying to process. Then Julia rushed out of the chapel, her face a mix of shock and concern. "Beatrice, what was that? Why Richard?" But Richard interrupted her with a look. "Julia, right? Can you give us a minute?" Julia blinked, then slowly stepped back. Richard turned his attention back to Beatrice. "The reception. Is there a reception planned?" Beatrice nodded, still dazed at the hotel ballroom in an hour. Richard considered that. "We'll show up, greet people, keep up the charade, and after that, we'll talk about how to untangle this mess." Untangle? Of course, this wasn't real. It was just a temporary rescue. Beatrice knew that, but still, something inside her twisted at hearing those words. The hotel ballroom was immaculate, round tables covered with white linens, floral arrangements that cost a fortune, crystal chandeliers reflecting golden light in every direction. Beatrice had chosen every detail carefully during months of planning, and now she was there, arm in arm with the wrong man, about to enter her own wedding reception, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Richard strode down the hotel corridor with that unwavering confidence, greeting people with subtle waves, as if it were perfectly natural to be in another man's place. Beatrice could barely breathe, the wedding dress weighing tons, the bouquet crumpled in her trembling hand. This was madness, complete and utter madness. "Breathe," Richard whispered without looking at her. "If you faint now, the whole charade will go down the drain." Beatrice shot him a glare but obeyed, inhaling slowly. How could he be so calm? They had just pretended to be married. They kissed in front of 200 people, and now they were about to enter a reception where they would have to dance, cut the cake, and receive congratulations. It was surreal. The double doors of the ballroom opened, and the master of ceremonies, clearly confused but professional, announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the newlyweds, Beatrice Adams." He hesitated briefly. "And Richard Taylor." Polite applause echoed through the ballroom. Beatrice saw familiar faces turning, some smiling, others still processing what had happened in the chapel. They entered, and Beatrice felt hundreds of eyes on her. She recognized co-workers, college friends, distant relatives, neighbors, all looking with that mix of curiosity and confusion. Where was Ryan? Why was Richard Taylor, Beatrice's notoriously cold boss, in his place? Speculations ran wild. She could see it in the barely concealed whispers, in the exchanged glances. Richard guided her to the head table, pulled out a chair for her to sit, a chivalrous gesture that seemed automatic. Beatrice sat down, her legs shaky, and Richard took the chair. Beside her, the chair Ryan should have occupied. The thought hit her like a punch to the stomach. Ryan, the man she had planned to spend her life with, the man who had simply sent 3 words via text, and disappeared. "Are you okay?" Richard asked softly, leaning slightly in her direction. Beatrice forced a smile. "Perfectly fine. I just married my boss in a complete charade after being left at the altar. How could I not be fine?" The sarcasm came out more bitter than she intended. Richard didn't seem offended. "Fair enough." He picked up a glass of water and handed it to her. "Drink. You look pale." Beatrice accepted the glass, grateful to have something to do with her hands. She sipped slowly, trying to calm the storm inside her. Around them, the guests began to settle at their tables, still animatedly discussing the bizarre event. Beatrice could hear fragments. "I always knew there was something between them. Ryan must have found out. I bet it's a corporate scandal." Each theory more absurd than the last. Julia appeared beside the table, her face still shocked. "Beer, we need to talk." Beatrice looked at her friend, then at Richard. He subtly acknowledged her, as if giving permission. Beatrice stood up, following Julia to a more discreet corner of the ballroom. As soon as they were relatively alone, Julia exploded. "What was that? You and Richard? Since when?" Beatrice shook her head. "It's not what you think, Ju. Richard and I are not together. We never were." Julia stared at her incredulously. "Then why did he pretend to be your groom? Why did you get married?" Beatrice took a deep breath. "He was trying to help me, to save me from complete humiliation. It was his impulse, and I accepted because I couldn't stand being the center of the laughter anymore." Julia processed that in silence. "You're both crazy, completely crazy. You know this is going to have consequences, right? Legal consequences." Beatrice hadn't thought about it. Of course she hadn't. She was too busy trying not to fall apart. "We'll deal with it later," she said, echoing Richard's words. "Right now, I just need to get through this reception without breaking down." Julia pulled her into a tight hug. "I've known you for 10 years, Bea, and I've never seen you so lost." Beatrice felt her eyes sting, but she blinked quickly, pushing the tears away. "I don't know what to do, Ju. Ryan just left. No explanation, no conversation, and now I'm here pretending to be married to another man." Julia held her face. "We're going to find out what happened with Ryan, but right now you need to pull yourself together. Everyone is watching." Beatrice nodded, straightening her posture. Julia was right. She could fall apart later. Right now, she needed to maintain the charade. She returned to the head table, where Richard was politely conversing with Beatrice's dad, who looked completely lost, but was trying to be courteous. "Dad," Beatrice gently interrupted. He turned, his eyes red. He had cried at the chapel. Beatrice had seen. "I don't understand anything that's happening." "About Ryan." She touched his arm. "I'll explain later, I promise. But right now, please just pretend that everything is fine." Her dad looked between her and Richard, clearly confused, but nodded. "If that's what you want." Beatrice didn't know what she wanted, didn't know anything anymore. But accepting that was easier than trying to explain. The food began to be served. Beatrice barely touched her plate, her stomach too twisted to eat. Richard, on the other hand, ate calmly, as if he were at some business dinner. How could he manage that? "You need to eat something," he said, not looking at her. "People will notice if you don't eat." Beatrice picked up her fork mechanically, taking a tiny piece of food. She chewed without tasting, swallowing with difficulty. Richard was right. They needed to keep up appearances, but every second there was torture. Every glance from the guests, every whisper, every fake smile. Beatrice wanted to scream, wanted to run away, wanted to wake up and find out it was all just a terrible nightmare. "Why did you do this?" she suddenly asked, turning to Richard. He paused his fork in mid-air and finally looked at her. "What did you do?" Beatrice gestured vaguely. "All of this? Pretending to be my groom? Marrying me? Why? Richard set his fork down, wiped his mouth with the napkin. For a moment he just studied her, those dark, impenetrable eyes as always. Because I saw what was happening, he said. I finally saw how those people were laughing at you, and I couldn't just stand by. Beatrice frowned. But why do you barely talk to me outside the office, treat me with the same coldness you treat everyone? Why do you suddenly care? Richard looked away. I didn't say I cared. I said I couldn't just stand by. It's different. But Beatrice didn't believe him. There was something there, something he wasn't saying. Before she could press further, the MC announced the couple's dance. Beatrice froze. Of course, the dance. She had chosen the song with Ryan, rehearsed the steps, and now she would have to dance with Richard in front of everyone. Richard stood up, extending his hand. Let's just get this over with. His voice was tense for the first time. Beatrice took his hand, and he led her to the center of the ballroom. The music started, a romantic song that now sounded cruel. Richard pulled her close, one hand on her waist, the other holding her hand. They began to move, and Beatrice was surprised to realize he danced well, better than Ryan, in fact. You dance? She commented, needing to fill the silence. Richard shrugged. Mandatory classes in my teens. My mom insisted. It was the first personal information he shared. Beatrice knew nothing about Richard's family. He never talked about his life outside of work. He was a complete mystery. They danced in silence for a few moments, and Beatrice found herself noticing things she had never noticed before. The way his hand was firm, but not possessive on her waist. The scent of his cologne, something woody and expensive. The closeness of their bodies, so different from the formality of the office, was disconcerting. Is everyone watching? She whispered. Let them look, Richard replied. The more convincing we are now, the fewer questions later. The music ended, and the guests applauded. Beatrice quickly stepped away from Richard, uncomfortable with the forced intimacy. They returned to the table, and the rest of the reception unfolded in a blur. There was the cake cutting, where Beatrice had to smile and pretend to be happy while feeding Richard a piece. There were the toasts, where people who barely knew her made speeches about love and commitment that sounded hollow. There was the bouquet toss, which Beatrice threw without emotion, and a cousin caught it. And through it all, Richard remained by her side, solid and impassive, playing the role of groom with unsettling perfection. When it finally ended, when the last guest left and Beatrice was alone with Richard in the empty ballroom, she felt her legs give way. Richard caught her before she fell. Easy. You've held it together until now. Beatrice looked at him, and for the first time since it all began, she allowed the tears to fall. I married you, she said, her voice breaking. I really married you. What have I done? What have we done? Richard guided her to a chair, helping her sit. He knelt in front of her, surprisingly gentle. We did what needed to be done at the moment, and now we'll figure this out together. Beatrice wiped her tears. How? How do we undo a marriage that shouldn't have happened? Richard hesitated, and Beatrice saw something pass across his face. Doubt, fear, but then the mask returned. Annulment. We can file for an annulment. Marriage under emotional duress. Extraordinary circumstances. My lawyer can handle it. Of course he could. Beatrice had a lawyer for everything. She nodded, too exhausted to think straight. And even then, Richard stood up. Even then, we keep our distance. We go back to normal at the office. We pretend this was just a moment of temporary madness. It sounded simple, but Beatrice knew it wouldn't be. How would she return to normal after this? How would she work alongside the man she pretended to marry? How could she look him in the eyes without remembering the kiss at the altar, the dance, the way he assured her when she almost broke down? Richard, she called as he turned to leave. He stopped, looking over his shoulder. Thank you for today, for trying to help me, even if it was madness." Richard fell silent for a long moment. "Don't thank me yet. You might end up hating me when all this is over." And then he left, leaving Beatrice alone in the empty ballroom, dressed as a bride, married to the wrong man, with no idea how her life had crumbled so completely in a matter of hours. She looked at the ring on her left hand, a simple band that Richard had somehow provided. It wasn't the ring she had chosen with Ryan. That one was still tucked away somewhere, waiting for a groom who never showed up. Beatrice spun the ring on her finger, and something inside her broke definitively. Julia returned to fetch her, finding her still sitting there alone. "Come on, Bea, let's take you home." Beatrice stood up as Julia guided her to the car. Looking out the window at the streets of New York, illuminated by the night, Beatrice tried to process everything. Ryan had abandoned her. Richard had saved her. She was married to her boss, legally married. How was it possible that her life had turned upside down so quickly? "What am I going to do now?" she asked aloud, more to herself than to Julia. Her friend took her hand. "Now you're going to rest, and tomorrow we'll start picking up the pieces." But Beatrice wasn't sure if there were enough pieces to put together. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. When she got home, her apartment was exactly as she had left it in the morning. Wedding dress strewn about, makeup on the vanity, morning decoration flowers still fresh, everything prepared for a day that was supposed to be perfect and had turned into the worst day of her life. Beatrice struggled to take off the dress, letting it fall to the floor in a heap of lace and tulle. She took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the horrible day, but even when she was clean, dressed in comfortable pajamas, lying in her own bed, she couldn't turn off her brain. The images kept coming back, Ryan not showing up, the laughter of the guests, Richard walking up the altar, the kiss, the dance, the ring that now weighed on her finger, and underneath it all, a question she didn't want to answer, because amidst all that chaos, Richard's presence had been the only thing that kept her from completely falling apart. Monday came too quickly. Beatrice woke up to the alarm clock ringing insistently, the sound piercing through the little sleep she had managed to get. She had spent Sunday locked at home, ignoring calls, deleting social media after seeing the wedding photos spread everywhere. "Businessman saves employee from embarrassment at the altar," read one headline. "Secret romance at the office turns into a whirlwind marriage," speculated another. Each version more fabricated than the last, and now she had to go back to the office, see Richard, work alongside him as if nothing had happened. The thought made her nauseous. She dressed mechanically, choosing a sober outfit, nothing flashy. She pinned her hair into a tight bun, light makeup to hide the dark circles. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older, tired, broken. The ring was still on her finger. Beatrice nervously spun it. She should take it off, but that would raise more questions. She left it where it was. On the way to the office, her stomach churned. Everyone would know. Of course they would. Her marriage to Richard was everywhere. How would she face her co-workers? What would she say? The office was on the 22nd floor of a commercial building in Midtown. When Beatrice entered, silence fell immediately. Everyone stopped what they were doing and stared. She kept her head held high, walking straight to her desk. She could hear the whispers starting behind her. It's her. She married her boss. What a scandal. Beatrice sat down, turned on her computer, pretended everything was normal, but her hands trembled over the keyboard. Anna, a co-worker from the next desk, approached cautiously. "Bea, is it true, you and Richard?" Beatrice didn't know how to respond. Lie, confirm, explain. "It's complicated," she said. "Finally." Anna's eyes widened. "Complicated? How?" Before Beatrice could answer, the door to Richard's office opened. He stepped out, impeccable suit as always, neutral expression. He scanned the office with his eyes, and when he found Beatrice, something imperceptible passed over his face. Then he returned to his office, closing the door behind him. Clear message. He didn't want to be disturbed. Anna let out a nervous laugh. He's being colder than usual. I thought after getting married, Beatrice cut in. Can we not talk about this? I just want to work. Anna stepped back, hurt. Okay, sorry for caring. Beatrice immediately regretted it, but she didn't know how to fix it. Everything was crumbling, and she couldn't hold the pieces together. Tomorrow dragged on in agony. Beatrice tried to focus on the projects, but the stares wouldn't stop. People walked by her desk just to watch her. Some greeted her with fake smiles, others just stared. Beatrice felt exposed, and at 11, she received an email from Richard. Subject, meeting 11:30. Just that, no context. Beatrice looked at his closed door. They needed to talk anyway. Maybe it was about the annulment. When the clock struck 11:30, she stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked to his office. She knocked lightly. Come in. His voice was professional, distant. Beatrice entered, closing the door behind her. Richard was sitting behind the large desk, papers scattered, computer open. He didn't look up immediately. Have a seat. Beatrice obeyed, her hands sweating. Finally, Richard looked at her, and for the first time since Saturday, she saw exhaustion on his face. He hadn't slept well either. We need to establish some rules, he began bluntly. The entire office knows about the wedding. We can't change that, but we can control how we handle the situation from here on. Out. Beatrice nodded, waiting. Here we are professionals, nothing more. We don't comment on what happened. We don't confirm or deny anything. We work as usual. And the annulment? Beatrice asked. Richard hesitated. My lawyer is reviewing it, but there are complications. Beatrice frowned. What kind of complications? Richard leaned back in his chair. The ceremony was valid. We have a signed marriage certificate. To annul it, we would need to prove coercion or fraud. And doing that publicly means exposing the whole story, which you want to avoid. Beatrice felt panic rising. So what do we do? Richard studied her for a long moment. Divorce is simpler, quicker. We claim irreconcilable differences. No one needs to know the details. Divorce. The word sounded strange, as if divorcing someone she had never truly been married to. How long? She asked. A few months, maybe more, depending on the paperwork. Months. Beatrice would have to live for months married to Richard. And in the meantime, Richard leaned forward. We keep our distance. We don't give reasons for further speculation. You do your job, I do mine. When the divorce is finalized, we say it didn't work out and move on. It sounded reasonable, but there was something in his voice that Beatrice couldn't identify. Tension, regret. All right, she agreed. We can do this. Richard nodded, returning his attention to the computer. Beatrice understood the dismissal. She stood to leave, but paused at the door. Richard, he raised his eyes. Why did you really do that? The question hung in the air between them. Richard remained silent, his jaw tense. Because it was the right thing to do, he finally said. But Beatrice didn't believe it. There was something more, something he wasn't saying. She wanted to press, to discover, to understand. But his look made it clear. Conversation over. Beatrice left, closing the door softly, returning to her desk, trying to process. Months married to Richard. How would she survive that? The rest of the day was torture. Every time someone looked at her, Beatrice felt the weight of judgment. During lunch, she ate alone at her own table, avoiding the break room, where everyone would surely be talking about her. At 5 p.m., as she was gathering her things to leave, Julia appeared. She worked in another building but had clearly made a point to stop by. Come on, let's grab a coffee. You need to get out of this office. Beatrice didn't argue, grabbed her handbag and followed her friend. They went to a nearby cafe, sitting in a discreet corner. Julia ordered 2 cappuccinos and waited for Beatrice to start. It was awful, Beatrice admitted. Everyone staring, whispering, and Richard, he's acting like nothing happened. Julia took a sip of her coffee. And what did you expect? That he'd declare eternal love? Beatrice grimaced. Of course not, but a little bit of, I don't know, humanity. Bea, you've known Richard for 3 years. Has he ever been human? Beatrice thought. Julia was right. Richard had always been cold, distant, extremely professional. Why would she expect anything different now? He talked about divorce, Beatrice shared. A few months of waiting, Julia nodded. And Ryan, any news? Beatrice shook her head. Nothing. He's completely disappeared. The hurt returned, fresh and painful. The man she had loved, who she had planned a lifetime with, had simply vanished. Are you going to go after explanations? Julia asked. Beatrice didn't know. Part of her wanted answers. Another part was afraid of what she would discover. I still don't know, she admitted. They spent an hour talking, Julia trying to cheer Beatrice up with jokes and random gossip. It worked a little. When she returned home, Beatrice felt marginally better. But upon entering the empty apartment, loneliness hit hard. She turned on the TV for background noise, prepared a simple dinner that she barely touched. She was washing the dishes when her phone rang, an unknown number. Beatrice answered cautiously. Hello? Silence. Then a familiar male voice. Bea, it's me, Ryan. Beatrice almost dropped the phone. Ryan, anger exploded instantly. Where the hell have you been? How dare you call me now? I know you're angry. I deserve it. His voice sounded tired. But I need to explain. Beatrice didn't want to listen, wanted to hang up, but a part of her needed to understand. Explain, then. Explain why you left me at the altar in front of 200 people. Explain that 3-word message. Ryan took a deep breath. I panicked. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up and realized I wasn't ready, that I didn't know if I loved you the way I should, and I couldn't go to the chapel and pretend. Beatrice felt tears burning. So you just ran away, sent a message and disappeared. I know it was cowardly, I know, but I couldn't face you. Where are you now? Beatrice asked. At my brother's house in a suburb of New York, far away, safe, convenient. And only now you decide to call. Ryan hesitated. I saw the wedding photos with that guy, Richard. Of course he saw. Everyone saw. Well, you didn't show up. Someone had to be there. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Are you two together? Ryan asked, and Beatrice almost laughed at the irony. He had abandoned her, but had the nerve to sound jealous. That's none of your business. Bea, please, I still care about you. Beatrice felt anger boiling. You don't have the right to care. You gave up that right when you left me alone at the altar. I want to talk in person, explain everything properly. Beatrice closed her eyes. No, I don't want to see you. Not now, maybe never. Please, Bea. She hung up before he finished. Her hands were trembling. Ryan had called. After everything he had called and sounded regretful, lost, part of Beatrice wanted to scream at him, demand complete answers. Another, and part just wanted to forget. She looked at the ring on her finger, married to Richard, legally married for months. Her life was a complete mess, and she had no idea how to fix it. The phone rang again, Ryan insisting. Beatrice hung up without answering, blocking the number. Not now, not like this. That night, Beatrice dreamed of the altar. But this time, when Richard leaned in to kiss her, he didn't stop. The kiss deepened, becoming real, turning into something that left her breathless, and when she woke up startled, heart racing, Beatrice realized with horror that she wasn't scared of the dream. She was scared because she had liked it. She looked at the clock, 3 a.m., turned over in bed, pulling the pillow over her head. This was just mental confusion, stress, abandonment trauma. It meant nothing. Richard was her boss, a cold man who had helped her for reasons she didn't understand, nothing more. But even repeating that mentally, Beatrice couldn't fall back asleep. The following weeks dragged on in a strange and uncomfortable routine. Beatrice and Richard maintained the agreed distance at the office, interacting only when absolutely necessary. Meetings were professional, emails concise, conversations non-existent. Her co-workers eventually stopped staring so much, getting used to her presence, but Beatrice felt the constant tension, like a wire stretched to the breaking point. Every time she crossed paths with Richard in the hallway, her heart inexplicably raced. Every time she heard his voice in meetings, something inside her stirred. It was disturbing and confusing, and Beatrice desperately tried to ignore it. In the third week after the wedding, Richard called her into his office again. Beatrice entered cautiously. He was standing by the window, looking at the city below. "We need to go to an event," he said bluntly. Beatrice frowned. "What event?" Richard turned around. "Charity dinner. Important clients will be there. Normally I go alone, but given the circumstances, my absence with the newlywed wife would raise questions." Wife. The word sounded strange. "You want me to go as your wife?" Beatrice asked incredulously. "I want you to go as my date. We show up together, keep up appearances, leave. Simple." Nothing about that was simple. "When?" Beatrice asked resignedly. "Friday, 7 p.m. I'll pick you up." Richard turned his attention back to the papers on the desk. Clear dismissal. Beatrice left, stomach churning. A social event with Richard, pretending to be a couple, as if the situation wasn't complicated enough. Friday came too quickly. Beatrice spent hours choosing the right dress, something elegant but not over the top. She opted for a knee-length navy blue dress, discreet neckline, medium heels. She pinned her hair in a low bun, light makeup. When the doorbell rang at exactly 7, she took a deep breath before opening it. Richard looked impeccable. Tailored black suit, grey tie, perfectly styled hair. And for the first time, Beatrice really saw him. Not as a boss, not as an improvised savior, but as a man. And he was a handsome man, extremely handsome, in a way she had never noticed before. "Are you ready?" he asked, and Beatrice realized she was staring. "Yes, let's go." They went down to his car, an imported sedan, and Richard opened the door for her. Automatic gesture, deeply ingrained politeness. During the drive, they remained silent. Beatrice watched the city pass by the window, trying to calm her nerves. "Are you nervous?" Richard suddenly commented. "That wasn't a question." "I am," she admitted. "I don't know how to act in these situations." "Just be yourself. Just keep up the story that we got married for love." Love. How to pretend something that didn't exist. But Beatrice nodded. The event was at a luxury hotel in the gardens. When they arrived, a valet took the keys, and Richard offered his arm to Beatrice. She accepted, and they entered together into the ballroom, decorated with exaggerated opulence, crystal chandeliers, tables with expensive floral arrangements, waiters circulating with champagne. Beatrice felt out of place immediately, but Richard guided her confidently, greeting people, introducing her as his wife. Every time he said the word, Beatrice felt a strange tightening in her chest. "Richard, what a surprise to see you with company." A man approached, wide smile shaking Richard's hand. "Frank, pleasure. This is Beatrice, my wife." Frank studied Beatrice with interest. "Wife? I didn't know you had married." Richard maintained a neutral expression. It was recent, small ceremony. Lies upon lies. Beatrice smiled politely as Frank greeted her. They talked about business, and Beatrice remained quiet, just listening. It was fascinating to see Richard in that environment, commanding attention effortlessly, speaking with natural authority. When Frank finally said goodbye, Beatrice exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Did you do well?" Richard commented softly. I just stayed quiet, Beatrice replied. Sometimes that's exactly what you need to do. He guided her to a table where they sat for dinner. The food was sophisticated, small portions artistically arranged. Beatrice ate slowly, hyper-aware of Richard beside her. At one point, he placed his hand over hers on the table, a casual gesture for anyone watching. But the touch sent an electric shock up Beatrice's arm. She looked at him, surprised. "People are watching," he explained quietly. "Of course, just representation." Beatrice forced a smile, leaving her hand. Where it was. After dinner, there was dancing. Couples moved across the floor to the sound of soft music. Richard stood up, extending his hand. "We need to dance." It wasn't a request. Beatrice took his hand, and he led her to the dance floor. For the second time in a few weeks, Beatrice found herself in his arms, dancing. But this time, it was different. There was no pressure from hundreds of curious guests, no recent trauma clouding everything. It was just the two of them, moving to the rhythm of the music. Richard held her firmly, a more present professional. "You really dance well," Beatrice said, needing to break the silence. "You've mentioned that before," Richard replied, something like amusement in his voice. "Why have you never married?" The question slipped out before Beatrice could filter it. Richard looked at her, surprised. "Sorry," she hurried. "It's none of my business." Richard hesitated, then replied, "I never found someone worth it. Complicating my life, brutal honesty, typical of him. And now his life is complicated because of me," Beatrice said softly. Richard pulled her a little closer. "I chose to complicate it. No one forced me." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Something indefinable that made Beatrice's heart race. The music ended, and they quickly pulled away. The rest of the night passed in a blur of superficial conversations and forced smiles. When they finally left, Beatrice felt immense relief. In the car on the way back, neither of them spoke. The tension was palpable. Richard stopped in front of her building, turning off the engine. "Thank you for coming," he said formally. Beatrice nodded. "Thank you for letting me know in advance." She opened the door to get out, but hesitated. "Richard, can I ask you something?" He looked at her expectantly. "Do you regret pretending to be my fiancé?" Richard was silent for so long that Beatrice thought he wouldn't answer. "Then no, I don't regret it." His eyes held hers, intense. "And you?" Beatrice thought about the humiliation avoided, the chaos that followed, the current confusion. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. Beatrice went up to her apartment, threw her shoes in the corner, and collapsed on the couch. The night had been exhausting, but she couldn't deny that dancing with Richard, talking to him outside of work, had been different. Well, until she shook her head, pushing the thought away. It was just circumstance, trauma, making her seek comfort in the wrong place, nothing more. But when she lay in bed that night, Beatrice found herself thinking about how Richard held her while they danced, the warmth of his hand over hers, the intensity of those dark eyes. And for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, what if it wasn't just pretend? What if there was something real there? On the following Monday, Beatrice arrived at the office, determined to return to normalcy. But when she sat at her desk, she found an envelope. Inside, a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. "We need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop around the corner at 3. "Richard, why didn't you just send an email like always?" Beatrice tucked the note away, her heart racing. The day dragged on until 3. When she finally went down, she found Richard already sitting in a discreet corner, 2 cups of coffee on the table. She sat down cautiously. "What happened?" Richard pushed a cup toward her. "The lawyer called about the divorce." Beatrice held the cup. "And the complications. Apparently, since we had The public ceremony with witnesses, signed certificate, claiming immediate incompatibility would raise suspicions. The judge might question the original validity of the marriage, which would bring the whole story to light. Beatrice felt panic rising. So, what do we do? Richard took a sip of his coffee. We wait 6 months at least, a reasonable time for a marriage to fail, without raising too many questions. 6 months, half a year married to Richard. That's a long time, Beatrice whispered. I know. Richard looked as frustrated as she felt, but it's the best option. Beatrice processed that. 6 months maintaining. Appearances, living that lie. What if someone finds out the truth, she asked. Richard looked at her seriously. No one can find out. It would be marital fraud, legal issues for both of us. The weight of that fell on Beatrice. They were trapped, completely trapped. Okay, she agreed, because what choice did she have? Richard seemed relieved. Let's continue as before. Distance, professionalism. But even as he said that, his eyes said something else, something Beatrice couldn't decipher. They returned to the office separately, maintaining discretion. But when Beatrice sat at her desk, reality hit her with full force. 6 months, half a year, pretending to be married to a man she barely knew, a man who confused her, who made her feel things she shouldn't. How would she survive this? 2 months passed since the wedding. Beatrice and Richard had fallen into a strange but functional routine. They worked side by side during the day, maintaining strict professionalism, but occasionally had to appear together at events, client dinners, corporate parties. Each time, the line between pretense and reality blurred more. Beatrice found herself noticing details about Richard that she had never seen before. The way he adjusted his tie when nervous, the little crease between his eyebrows when focused, the rare laugh that completely transformed his face. It was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous, but she couldn't stop. One Thursday, Beatrice was reviewing projects when her phone vibrated. Message from Julia, "Emergency, I need you now." Beatrice frowned, grabbed her handbag, and went to Richard's office. She knocked lightly. "Come in." She opened the door. "I need to leave early. Family emergency." Richard studied her. "Okay." Beatrice hesitated. Julia wasn't technically family, but she was the closest person she had. "Yes, I just need to go." Richard nodded. "Go, call me if you need anything." The genuine concern in his voice surprised her. "Thank you." Beatrice quickly left, driving to Julia's apartment. When she arrived, she found her friend on the couch crying. "Ju, what happened?" Julia wiped her face. "I broke up with Frank." Beatrice sat beside her, pulling her into a hug. "Tell me everything," Julia sobbed. "I found out he was cheating on me with his ex for months." Beatrice felt anger burn. "That jerk!" Julia shook her head. "He's not worth it, but it hurts me." "I know. Believe me, I know." They stayed there for hours, Beatrice comforting Julia, letting her vent. When Julia finally fell asleep, exhausted from crying, Beatrice covered her with a blanket. She looked at the clock. 9 p.m. She should go home, but the thought of returning to the empty apartment depressed her. She grabbed her phone, hesitated, then typed, "Julia, are you okay? Thanks for asking." She sent it to Richard. The reply came quickly. "I'm glad. Are you okay?" Beatrice looked at the screen because he cared. "I'm just tired." "Still at her apartment?" "Yes." "Address?" Beatrice frowned, but sent the address. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. She opened it, surprised to find Richard there, holding 2 bags. "What are you doing here?" He raised the bags. "Food. I bet none of you have eaten." Beatrice was speechless. Ryan walked straight to the kitchen as if he knew the place. He started pulling out containers from the bags, Italian food, apparently from a fancy restaurant. "You didn't have to," Beatrice said, but her stomach growled, betraying her. Ryan smiled slightly. Clearly he needed to. They ate in silence, sitting at the kitchen counter. Beatrice hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. "Thank you," she finally said, "for this, for caring." Ryan looked at her. "Why wouldn't I care?" Beatrice had no answer for that. When they finished, Ryan helped wash the dishes, the two working side by side in comfortable silence. "Can I ask you something?" Beatrice suddenly said. Ryan dried his hands. "Sure. Why are you so different outside the office?" Ryan leaned against the counter. "Different how?" Beatrice gestured vaguely. "At work, you're cold, distant, but outside you bring food, ask if I'm okay, act like you really care." Ryan was silent for a long moment. "Maybe I've always cared. I just didn't know how to show it." The admission caught her off guard. "Ryan," he shook his head. "No, never mind. It was just a comment." But Beatrice couldn't let it go. "Do you care about me?" Ryan looked at her, and for the first time, Beatrice saw real vulnerability in his eyes. "Yes, I care." Her heart raced. "Since when?" Ryan ran his hand through his hair, an unusual gesture for him. "I don't know. For some time, but you were with Raphael and I don't mix personal life with work. Never have, until I saved you." "At the altar," Beatrice whispered. Ryan took a step toward her. "Until I saved you at the altar." They were close now, dangerously close. Beatrice could feel his warmth, the scent of his cologne. "This is crazy," she said, but she didn't pull away. "I know." Ryan raised his hand, lightly touching her face. "We're technically married." Beatrice tried to joke, but her voice came out shaky. "It's the strangest marriage in the world." Ryan agreed, his thumb tracing her jawline. "But I can't pretend anymore. I can't pretend I don't feel anything." Beatrice closed her eyes. This was dangerous, too complicated. They would have to get divorced in a few months. But when she opened her eyes and saw the way Ryan looked at her, as if she were something precious, all her reasons against it vanished. "Ryan." He leaned in, giving her time to back away. She didn't back away. Their lips met, and it wasn't like at the altar. It wasn't chaste or fake. It was real, desperate, filled with months of unresolved tension. Beatrice found herself responding, her hands climbing up his shoulders, pulling him closer. Ryan pressed her against the counter, deepening the kiss. It was intoxicating, frightening, perfect. When they finally pulled apart, both were out of breath. "This complicates everything," Beatrice whispered. "I know," Ryan replied, resting his forehead against hers. "But I don't regret it." Beatrice didn't regret it either. She should, but she didn't. "What do we do now?" Ryan pulled back slightly, holding her face in his hands. "We stop pretending, at least between us." Beatrice felt it, unable to form words. Ryan kissed her again, softer this time. A sound from the living room interrupted them. Julia moving on the couch. They quickly separated, like teenagers caught doing. "Something wrong." Beatrice let out a nervous laugh. "I should go," Ryan said, sounding reluctant. "Yeah, probably." But neither of them moved. Finally, Ryan took a step back. "Good night, Beatrice." The way he said her name made something melt inside her. "Good night?" She walked him to the door. Before leaving, Ryan turned. "Can we talk tomorrow?" Beatrice nodded. "Yes, tomorrow." He left, and Beatrice leaned against the closed door, her heart still racing. What just happened? She returned to the living room, where Julia was now awake, looking at her with a curious expression. "Was it Ryan?" "Beatrice." "You blushed." "Yes, he brought food." Julia raised an eyebrow. "How kind! And why are you red?" Beatrice sat on the couch. We kissed." Julia's eyes widened. "What? When?" "Just now in the kitchen." Beatrice covered her face with her hands. "This is crazy, right?" I'm being completely crazy." Julia pulled her hands away. "Bea, look at me. Do you like him?" Beatrice thought. She did. It was more than that. It was attraction, yes, but also admiration, respect, something deeper she couldn't name. "I think so," she admitted, "but it's so complicated. We have to get divorced. He's my boss." And it all started with a huge lie. Julia smiled softly. "Love is usually complicated, but the question is it worth trying?" Beatrice didn't know, but when she thought of the kiss, the way Ryan looked at her, the kindness he showed when he thought no one was watching, she wanted it to be worth it. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I think I want to find out." Julia hugged her. "Then find out. Life is too short not to take risks." Beatrice spent the night at Julia's apartment but barely slept. The next morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual. She needed to talk to Ryan, clear things up, but when she walked in, he was already there, standing by the window of his office. He saw her through the glass and waved for her to come in. Beatrice took a deep breath and went in. She closed the door behind her. "Good morning." Ryan turned. There was tension in his shoulders, uncertainty in his eyes. "About the day before yesterday." They both started at the same time, then stopped. Beatrice let out a nervous laugh. "You first." Ryan stepped closer. "I don't regret what happened, but I understand if you think it was a mistake." Beatrice shook her head. "It wasn't a mistake, at least not for me." Relief flooded his face. "So, what do we do?" Beatrice thought. "I think we stop fighting it. We see where it goes, but be careful, no expectations." Richard nodded. "And what about the divorce?" The question hung in the air. Beatrice had no answer. The divorce was planned for 4 months from now. But now, with everything changing, she no longer knew what she wanted. "We'll decide when the time comes," she finally said. "For now, let's just be honest with each other." Richard took her hand. "Honesty, I can do that." And for the first time in months, Beatrice felt something like hope. The following weeks were the most intense of Beatrice's life. She and Richard maintained professionalism at the office during the day, but after hours it was different. Discreet dinners at secluded restaurants, conversations that stretched into the early morning, constant discoveries about each other. Beatrice learned that Richard had lost his mother young, that he had built his empire alone, that beneath the cold exterior was a man with fears and dreams like anyone else. And Richard discovered Beatrice beyond the efficient employee, her passion for architecture that went beyond work, her love for classic films, the way she hummed softly when focused. They were truly falling in love. But the shadow of the planned divorce loomed over them. 2 months remained to complete the necessary 6, and neither of them brought up the subject. It was as if talking about the end would break the perfect bubble they lived in. Until one Friday, the envelope arrived. Beatrice was at home when the doorbell rang. A messenger delivered official documents, divorce papers. Richard's lawyer had sent them for review. Beatrice sat on the couch staring at the papers. There was the official end of the marriage that should never have happened. But now, after everything, the idea of signing it left her unsettled. She picked up her phone and called Richard. He answered on the first ring. "Beatrice, are you okay? I received the divorce papers." Silence on the other end. "I got them too." More silence. "Richard, we need to talk. For real, I know." "I'm on my way." He hung up. 20 minutes later, he was knocking on her door. Beatrice opened it, and just seeing him calmed something inside her. Richard stepped in, saw the papers on the coffee table. "So," he said, standing uncomfortably. "So," Beatrice echoed. They stared at each other for a long moment. "I don't want to sign," they both said at the same time. Beatrice blinked. "What?" Richard took a step toward her. "I don't want to divorce you. I know this started as a charade, but it's not anymore. At least not for me." Beatrice's heart raced. Not for me either. But Richard, what about the complications? You always said you didn't want to complicate your life. Richard took her hands. I was wrong. My life before you was empty. Organized, yes, but empty. You brought chaos, confusion, feelings I don't know how to express, and I don't want to go back to the emptiness. Beatrice felt tears burning. But people will talk. They will say it was always real. They will speculate. Let them talk, Richard said, holding her face. I'm tired of caring about what people think. The only opinions that matter are yours and mine. So I ask you, do you want to stay married to me? For real this time? Beatrice looked at that man who had appeared out of nowhere and turned her world upside down. The man who saved her when she was at rock bottom, who gradually showed he wasn't as cold as he seemed, who made her laugh, think, feel alive. Yes, she whispered. I want to. Richard smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his face. Then marry me again. The right way. Beatrice laughed through her tears. Are you proposing to me? I am. Technically, we're already married, but I want to do it right. I want to ask you. I want you to choose this consciously, not out of desperation or circumstance. He knelt right there in her modest living room, still holding her hands. Beatrice Adams, do you accept to continue being my wife? Not out of obligation, not for appearances, but because I love you and want to build a real life with you. Beatrice could barely see through her tears. Do you love me? Richard nodded. I love you. I think I've loved you since long before the marriage. I just didn't know. I love you too, Beatrice said, her voice breaking. I love you and want to stay married to you for real. Richard stood up, pulling her in for a kiss that was both a promise and a beginning at the same time. When they pulled away, both were laughing and crying simultaneously. So, do we tear up the divorce papers? Beatrice asked. Richard took the documents, tearing them in half, torn. He pulled her onto the couch, and they stayed there just holding each other, processing the magnitude of what they had just decided. People will find it strange, Beatrice said after a while, that we decided to stay married. Richard kissed the top of her head. Let them think. And at the office? Beatrice asked. This was real now. She was married to her boss. For real. Richard considered. Maybe it's time for you to be more than a project coordinator. Are you interested in a partnership? Beatrice pulled back to look at him. Are you serious? Completely. You're brilliant at what you do. I should have promoted you a long time ago. The fact that we're married doesn't change that. Beatrice felt emotion overflowing. He really had. Yes, I'm interested in a partnership. Richard smiled. Great. On Monday we'll announce, along with the fact that the marriage is real and permanent. Beatrice Adams, it's going to be a scandal. Let it be. They spent the weekend together planning not a new ceremony, but a life. Richard suggested that Beatrice move into his apartment, which was larger and more comfortable. She agreed, excited about the idea of finally living as a true couple. On Monday they arrived at the office together, not hiding it, walking in, and the looks were immediate. Richard gathered everyone in the conference room. I know there are speculations about my marriage to Beatrice, so I'm going to clarify once and for all. Yes, we got married quickly, but it wasn't a scam. It was convenience. It was love. We are together for real. Whispers exploded. Moreover, Richard continued, Beatrice will be promoted to partner for her competence, not because of our relationship. Anyone who has a problem with that can talk to me later. Tom left no room for arguments. The meeting ended, and people left commenting. But Beatrice didn't care. She held Richard's hand under the table, and he squeezed back. 2 weeks later, Beatrice was organizing her things. For the move when the doorbell rang, she opened the door and froze. Ryan, he was there, thinner, looking tired. Hi, B. Beatrice crossed her arms. "What do you want?" Ryan looked at the floor. "I came to sincerely apologize for what I did." "A bit late for that," Beatrice said coldly. "I know, but I needed to try. I was a coward, Bea. I panicked and messed everything up. I saw that you married that guy, Richard. Is it real?" Beatrice raised her hand, showing the ring. "Very real." Ryan seemed to shrink. "Do you love him?" Beatrice didn't hesitate. "Yes, I love him." It was absolute truth. "So I really lost you." Ryan tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "I guess I deserved it. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and I hope you're happy." Beatrice surprised herself by feeling pity for him. "Thank you, Ryan. I hope you find happiness too." Ryan nodded, turning to leave, but stopped. "Is he good to you?" Beatrice thought of Richard, the way he looked at her, how he held her, how he made her feel seen and valued. "He's perfect." Ryan smiled genuinely this time. "Well, you deserve it." And then he left, and Beatrice closed that chapter for good. When Richard arrived to help her with the move, she told him about the visit. "How do you feel?" he asked. Beatrice thought, relieved, closed off, ready to move on completely. Richard pulled her into a hug. "So let's move forward together." The move was chaotic and fun. Beatrice brought her things to Richard's spacious apartment, and he made sure to make room for everything. "It's our home now," he said. "Not mine, ours." Beatrice was touched by the inclusion. Gradually, they were building a life together. Shared dinners, mornings waking up together, routines that intertwined naturally. And for the first time since the fateful day of the marriage, Beatrice felt complete. One night, 3 months later, they were on the couch watching a movie when Richard paused. "Can I tell you something?" Beatrice turned to him. "Always." Richard took her hand. "I loved you before the marriage, a long time ago." Beatrice blinked. "Really? How long?" Richard smiled shyly. "Almost since you started working with me. But you were with Ryan, and I never allowed myself to even consider it. So, when I saw you at the altar alone, humiliated, something in me broke. I couldn't stand still, and when I suggested pretending, part of me hoped something real would come from it. But I never imagined you would reciprocate." Beatrice felt her heart overflow. "Richard Taylor, you're a romantic disguised as a cold businessman." He laughed. "Only with you." Beatrice kissed him, pouring everything she felt into that kiss. When they parted, she whispered, "Thank you for showing up at the altar." Richard rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you for agreeing to pretend, and then for making it real." They stood there, embraced, and Beatrice thought about the absurd journey that had brought them here. A groom who ran away, a boss who became a savior, a charade that turned into true love. It wasn't the marriage she had planned, but it was infinitely better because it was real, it was theirs, and it was forever. In the end, Beatrice realized something. Sometimes, what seems to be the worst day of your life is just the universe pushing you in the right direction. She had been left at the altar by the wrong man and found the right man in the most unlikely place.